So let's watch that little trailer there.
I seek truth, no use sits within me. How deep would I go to find what I know about me? You don't know me like God does, like I do. I've trained myself to know how to sing, trust myself, believe in everything, and I know I can keep up with my mind.
Are you hearing us, Ian?
I'm hearing you perfectly. That was a very exciting trailer. I got quite captivated.
Hey. Welcome to Indie Creators in the Joy Zone. Really wonderful to
right
have you.
Into the Joy Zone. Definitely.
Let's dive into that joy bliss zone with Ian Baker.
I got to tell you, I've been looking at all the covers of all of your books, and it's really quite beautiful and impressive. I got the privilege of editing that together, so I was able to, get some sense of what you're about just with those wonderful pictures. Where was that mountain range? Like, that big huge white mountain? Where was that?
I think that big white one you were seeing was Namche Barwa, which literally means the blazing sky metal, the very eastern edge of the end of the Himalayan range in Tibet.
Oh my goodness! So when were you there, and what happened?
Well, that's a long story.
How many times? He's been there so many times. And
No. That was the heart of the book I wrote, The Heart of the World, The Journey to Tibet's Lost Paradise. So that Namche was essentially
which I have your first edition here.
Yes, exactly. And then this is the second edition, which just out in the UK now. So this is the new edition of that. But anyway, it's a place that essentially was the Shangri-La for Tibetans, from texts that were date back to the 8th century and then started to be revealed progressively from the 15th century on. And it was an earthly paradise and a place at the same time extraordinarily difficult to get to. So that made it very, very compelling to go. So I went there year after year trying to follow the coordinates in these ancient texts towards the innermost secret place.
You sound like the modern day Indiana Jones, like going to find looking for the secrets and the ancient treasures here.
I've been accused of that, yes.
That's beautiful. Hey, we got the modern day Indiana Jones here in Ian Baker. Well, what was just because you have what appears to be an extraordinary existence, which is why we have you on this little show that we have here, Indie Creator. You definitely fall into the realm of non-conformist creator, independent spirit for sure, out there, trucking and finding your own way for sure. How did this where'd you get bit with this journey taking? When was your awakening? When was your enlightening?
Well, I won't go as far as to refer to that, but certainly the bug for the Himalayan world happened when I was 19, and I went literally on a college semester abroad program to Kathmandu, Nepal in the late 1970s, and that was really a turning point in my life, because I arrived in Nepal and just knew that's where I was going to live, and it became my home, for a long period after that, and was the hub of all my kind of activities for decades to come. So that was really the
from England to Nepal, Kathmandu. How was that?
It was from it was American. Step? Well, yeah, a natural step, I suppose. Growing up, we also lived all over the place. So I was born in New York, but we moved to London when I was 2, and then when I was 13, we moved to Norway. So I'd had a very kind of international kind of existence, and then so going to Nepal was obviously my first trip to Asia, but it was just a further expansion, so it was originally the mountains that drew me there. That was the initial impetus, and then met with great masters, great experiences.
Well, the question would be why? What's with the seeking out of great masters and all of this business of ancient text, and what does that do for you, and just in relation to we can guess what that does for you, but in terms of what is it that does what does it do for you?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd have to say that the gateway for me was definitely the mountains. In the sense that that's a long backstory I won't go into, but it was the lure of the Himalayas, the world's highest mountains, that drew me to. And I came to Nepal having had a passion for rock climbing, for mountaineering, for ascension, and so the Himalayas were the great gateway. So when I heard about these so-called hidden lands where the spiritual and the physical worlds overlap them, because I was also an art student at that time, so I studied with a Tibetan painter and told me about these so-called hidden lands, and so that became a quest really to understand what were these places in the Himalayas that had inspired these myths of a kind of proximate paradise, not rather than in our Western culture this idea of a paradise lost, but rather in the Himalayan world a paradise that was rather well hidden. And so that just was it just caught my imagination and also my thirst for adventure, and being told that these places were almost impossible to get to just in a sense whetted my appetite. So that's really what started me off on this journey. And then getting to these places and having tastes of them, it just became more and more this just compelling thing to just journey into these places where they were kind of non-ordinary landscapes where things happened differently. And
non-ordinary landscapes where things happen differently. Okay, help us with that. Help us mere mortals with that one, would you?
Sure. Okay. Well, to use your own reference points, they were joy zones. They were places really that were just innately, using the theme of this conversation and of your work, which I think is so important in this time, of bliss, places where there was a kind of natural fulfillment, a sense where you sort of actualize all your desires so that, there's a natural state where there's no more fear, there's no more grasping. You suddenly find yourself in this space, place, or whatever state.
Oh my goodness! Where's the bell? Where's the bell?
We have a real Tibetan bell here for you, Ian. No cowbell, but a yak bell.
I'm sorry, I have no accoutrements. I love the conch shell on your. I'm in a hotel room in transit on my way to Italy. So.
Are you?
I have. Yes.
Yeah. We have you set up. We have we're surrounded by Ian Baker. I have a collection of your books, so I'm a big fan.
I'm in a completely generic little hotel room in Glasgow, Scotland, about to get a flight early morning down to Rome. So.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, clearly you're influencing people, and clearly you're having an impact. So can you share with us some of the feedback that you get through your materials?
Sure.
Probably. Well.
Yeah. So I guess again, you're using the theme of bliss because I think it is so important. Because it's so easy in this strange phase that we're in on this planet to sort of fall out of bliss and become discouraged by what's happening in the world. So I think what I've done, since that kind of very momentous college semester abroad for me when I was 19, it was, to use that now rather cliched term that Joseph Campbell came up with, which is to follow your bliss. Because if we follow our heart, if we follow that which compels us most, then, in a certain sense, it's very hard to go wrong. Yes, sure, we'll fall, we'll stumble, we'll have many kind of crazy things happen along the way, but in a certain sense, we'll never doubt that we are following our deepest calling. So for me, that was somehow to go into the deepest mysteries of Tibetan Buddhism, which in a sense, these Tibetan hidden lands were the gateway for me into that reality. So I wanted to really understand what, all of these stories were in the Tibetan Buddhist world. So that meant sort of throwing myself into it as deeply and, you could say, unrestrictedly as I could. So as I said, my teacher sent me off to caves in the Himalayas, and I'd stay there for months at a time. And and then based on those experiences, he kept pushing me further and further. So that was, and again, what might have been, for others might have found it completely unappealing. For me, it was just very, very exciting to be pushing my boundaries. And I guess it was partly because I came to that part of the world, with this background in rock climbing, which I'd been introduced to, when I, was just 12, 13, 11, 12 years old by my stepfather. So it was always about pushing boundaries and finding delight and in all of this. So what for me in the Tibetan Buddhist. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that word pushing boundaries, because nowadays people are like, I got to create boundaries, and they create more constriction, limitations. So can you share more about pushing boundaries, going beyond?
Well, in a very literal sense, it's funny, when this trip that I've been putting off for ages to go down to visit a Tibetan Lama friend of mine who lives in Italy, and he said, now's the best time to visit because normally he's traveling all over the world, but right now he's at home. And so it's this again, but there's always this strange thing, where the world is suddenly, we're being mesmerized by fear, with this pandemic, understandably. At the same time, there's this sort of the freedom. So this sort of weighing the fear and the freedom and making sure one's not behaving recklessly. And at the same time, not letting oneself be kind of taken in by a rhetoric of fear, because all of that, of course, that can't serve us in the end. But of course, absolutely awareness and compassion for all beings, so that we don't endanger ourselves or others. But yeah, so to sort of that earlier question about, so my activities, whether it's in the books or the related activities, it's really about sharing experiences that were just so profound to me over time.
Look how exciting this is. Acclaimed explorer Ian Baker's long-awaited memoir of his journey to the long hidden source of Shangri-La myth, a blood-pumping account of claiming the world's last secret place. Wow, I mean that's from Men's Journal, and so you're moving people with this material. And I would imagine that do you have a story of somebody who's read some of your material that has used it to find their own way through the darkness?
I could share you one.
Oh, go please.
So one question, Ian, from this book, actually, I shared with you a long time ago when I was reading it. Thomas looks, it's very dog-eared, and it spoke to me deeply. In your second edition, how much has shifted, or what was updated? First of all, and then I'll share the story.
There's the dog.
Well, good. It looks absolutely.
It's red.
Well used. No, the second edition isn't really. It's not different. There's a new introduction. It's only that. So what happened after the publication of The Heart of the World, which is already quite some time ago, the part of Pemaku fall into an area that's now within India, in Arunachal Pradesh, in the northeastern Himalayan area of India. This was completely closed off at the time that I was making those journeys on the Tibetan side. But those opened up. So I made 3 subsequent expeditions into this place called Pemaku, but from the south, so going up the Tsongpo River from the jungle, from the Indian side.
Okay.
So there's some basic account of that. There's also some images from some photographs from that lower part of Pemaku, which is fascinating because it's kind of an extension of the journeys that form the tribal communities there, and it's actually where the so-called innermost gate into this sort of the innermost sanctuary, if you will, of this hidden land is meant to lie. So, so that journey continues. I was going to be going there. Yeah, I was going to go later. I was going to go early this coming year, but I think that's going to have to be postponed, just given global circumstances.
I so want to go. In the book, Heart of the World, Yeshe really spoke to me. Like as I was going through your writings in my dreaming practice, I would hear her chanting. It was so beautiful. If you can share some of the treasures that this region of the world has to offer, but through your brilliant writing, those who are resonate with the Tibetan lineage and maybe the mysticism of it and the natural energies really can reach out to you no matter where you are. You don't have to necessarily be there, but if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I think it's beautiful that it was Yeshe Sogyal. So this was the essentially from the 8th century was the first enlightened Tibetan, according to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, in the sense that she was the main disciple of Padmasambhava who brought Tantric Buddhism to Tibet. And she was the first one to become enlightened through her rigorous practice of the yoga of inner fire and all the other related sort of secret Tibet Tantric yogas. So she's an extraordinary, the power, really at the very outset of Tibetan Buddhism, because not only was she Padmasambhava's chief or most important disciple, consort, but she also was the one who transcribed many of his teachings that then were hidden and revealed only in subsequent centuries. So this sort of whispered lineage that you seem to be tuning into, I think, is really the ongoing transmission of this united front, if you want to almost call it that, of this path of bliss that Yeshe Tsogyal and Padmasambhava, in a almost as a united team, were able to instill in Tibet. And it kind of existed in parallel with the monastic tradition, which is so well known in the Tibetan world and which preserved so much of the tradition and the text. But it was really this yogic tradition, caves and households and outside of the monasteries, in which this real path of bliss, as it were, could thrive, and so deeply connected with nature, etc. So that, I think, is my sense of what you were tuning into in your kind of in your dream visionary worlds was Yeshe Tsogyal. So as you know, her name meaning primordial lake of primordial wisdom, and in a certain sense, it is this endless font. It's a wellspring of revelation that continues into the present.
Yeah, it's both Padmasambhava and Yeshe speak deeply to my heart, and they both, you might share with the listeners, for those that aren't aware about these beings, is that how much they alleviated darkness at a certain juncture, at their point in time in the physical realm, and how important that was, and even the transfer of the teachings from India to Tibet. If you have anything you feel is important that we maybe remember right now, maybe we're ready to remember.
Yeah, good. Well, I do think their story, which is a love affair basically, and in a way is it is very potent for our time, because if we look at what was happening in the incredible challenges that Tibet was going through at that time, we see how the emperor, King Trisong Detsen, was trying to establish Buddhism in Tibet in the 8th century, and all of his advisors at that time said, there's no way we can sort of establish just an ordinary tradition of renunciation from the world, which was, in a certain sense, what early Buddhism was about. Nirvana basically meant this kind of the great escape, as it were, from the sufferings and cycle of existence. So they said, no, we must invite this sort of great tantric master who will bring a form of Buddhism here that can thrive and which can truly bring about this transformation of Tibet. So that was the story of Padmasambhava coming from this land called Udayana on the northwest frontiers of the Indian subcontinent, and then his partnership with Yeshe Tsogyal, who was born a princess and then became the youngest and most favored queen of the emperor. But according to the different stories, there are many different accounts of it. But in any case, she and Padmasambhava became this very, very dynamic force in Tibet. I mentioned it was her questions to him that were then recorded, and the real essence of the tantric tradition, which kind of dialogue of Shiva and Shakti, which we have it in the Hindu Tantra, was in a sense recapitulated in these dialogues between Padmasambhava and Yeshe Tsogyal in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition.
You're so smart. Hey, you're so smart. You're hyper intelligent, and for us mediocre people in the ethers, like in between dumb and mediocre, there's got to be like a fundamental experience that you have that pulls you into this work, like something magical, something that the Earth is revealing to you that is not revealing to us mere mortals. There's got to be something in there. And like, I would imagine that there's some magic that you seek and that you occasionally touch on that keeps you writing books, keeps inspiring people. I mean, I can't get over the kudos that you get. I mean, one of the most extraordinary tales of adventure and discovery ever told. That's cool. That's San Francisco Chronicle. You move somebody to such an extent where they're able to give you that unabashed compliment. And so that just tells me that you're venturing in on things that either you're not willing to say or that you're too embarrassed to share because it's so fantastic that nobody would believe you if you shared it.
Oh, he wants you to go really like woo-woo.
No, I'm just saying.
Go for it. No boundaries.
I mean, there's got to be something in there that
Sure.
It's sort of horribly stated. I'm sure it could be eloquently stated by actually anybody on the planet. But the magic that you're seeking, the magic that you touch on, and some of the ethers and the intelligence that the universe shares with you through your meditative repose, and that are clearly captured in your books. I'm going to read one of these books, and I don't even read. My eyesight's going, so I'm going to actually read. I'm inspired to read your work. So, is there something like that that's happening? Like, tell us something that's kind of weird, and that maybe not weird to me, but not weird to you guys that are on the enlightened path.
Mm-hmm. No, you've really set me up, and it's a challenge to try to find a single emblematic event that represents, what has pulled me into all of this. But, just to frame it first, I think it's really this recognition that, on that first trip there were many things that sort of led to it, but on that first trip to Nepal, when I did meet Chatro Sengye Dorje Rinpoche, who was what became my teacher, who then passed away at 102 just 2-3 years ago, was just this, first of all, I felt transparent. I felt that I was seen, I was read, there was no, and at the same time, there was this, for me, a meeting of minds where I became very intrigued by this tradition of these hidden lands, as a kind of equivalent of the Shangri-La myth. Invention of the novelist James Hilton in the 1930s, but he was picking up on these ancient myths of Shambhala, but even more importantly, these hidden lands where the numinous and nominal worlds overlap. So I was very intrigued by it and went to this teacher, Dr. Rinpoche, at that time, and I asked him about these hidden lands, if he could explain what they were, and then he just looked at me and very pointed said, and this was a real turning point in my life. He said, "Can you spend a month alone?" I said, "Yeah, if there was a reason to, of course." He goes, "Well, come back when you have a month free, and then I'll send you to one of these hidden lands, and then you won't have to ask me what they are. You'll know for yourself." So obviously that was a challenge I couldn't refuse. So I arranged one summer when I was free. I went up to where he stayed in the summers, which is at the edges of this hidden land, the Deoyomo, right up on the Nepal-Tibet border. And when I arrived there, then he sent me off to this remote cave a couple of days walk away. He sent me with these nomads to take me there. And they got enough firewood to last for a month or two, and then they left. And then extraordinary things happened while I was there. And, without things that in my own mind defied any, couldn't be explained. So, and I do write about those at length in, there's a chapter in The Heart of the World called A Curriculum of Caves, when Chatro Rinpoche kept sending me to these different caves and strange, things that just sort of defy, they weren't happening in my meditative states, they were happening seemingly, in these periods between meditation of strain and light circuit. Anyway, I won't go into.
Oh, come on! Please do tell. You should keep saying I won't go into it. I'm like on the edge of my seat. It's like you're showing me a trailer without the.
Give him one little morsel.
Like I want to go to this movie. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to set it up, but I'm not going to go there.
No. Well, okay. Well, what I can say simply is that and this happened throughout the subsequent trips to this hidden land called Pemaku, where meteorological events just defied any kind of logical explanation, and where you felt the mind and the intentions of your mind, the receptivity of your mind was actually altering the way nature itself expressed itself. And suddenly I kind of, and there was this thing, it was like this sense of participation in nature, being seen by nature, seeing nature. It all became this indistinguishable kind of mind was extended into everything that was appearing, whether animals and this, the ravens that were perched up above the cave, to literally these fire balls that would sort of drift through the front of the cave, and had absolutely no way to explain what those were. And when I went back to Chaturanga, she said, no, this is very simple. These are the Shidduch. These are actually protector spirits there who are just checking you out. He said it's a good sign.
Wait a second here. Wait a second.
These are the things we don't learn in regular school.
The Shidduch were there to check you out. So, and he's like, whatever. That's just like, those are my buddies during the day and the night, and you just happen to stumble upon some because you entered into a state of mind that allowed you to see them, and they were there the whole time. You just now can see them because of your meditative repose, your work, your effort. How do you explain it?
I think all of those things, and I think just receptivity is a large part of it, openness to it, but I think this is really was the hook for me, because suddenly I realized that the phenomenal world that we find ourselves in, and we tend to define in our rather limited Newtonian worldview, and even if we don't think we want to, we suddenly recognize it's just there's these multiple layers. I mean, this is even what David Bowman in physics that refers to this infinite potential. I mean, we're in a multi-layered universe, and suddenly in these hidden lands, where we talked before about non-ordinary landscapes, and we also know about just non-ordinary reality. This was a sense of
non-ordinary landscapes. Wait a second. What's a non-ordinary landscape?
Well, that's what I think the Bayu, the hidden lands, were. In a certain sense, as I mentioned, according to the textual tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, they're places where the phenomenal and the so-called notional world, or the spiritual world, overlap. So in other words, there's a place, like here in Scotland, for example, they refer to, love that expression. It's sort of like Avalon, this idea that there is always this mystical dimension of reality, but but the particular places where it's thinner than others, and that's where the veil that normally just occludes that reality from our awareness is suddenly and we can sort of move if we're disposed in that way. We start to it's not only that we enter into those dimensions start to enter into us. And I think that was really the experience I had because of this intensive meditation at that place. You started to realize that you don't enter these hidden lands. You allow the hidden lands to sort of penetrate you. And then all of a sudden there's this sort of loss of boundary. So, it would be a state, probably a dissociated state. You could look at it many kind of clinical ways and probably come up with a less than favorable interpretation. But I think in the bliss zone, as we're speaking about, that's what happens when we transcend or let's say let drop away our ordinary egoic identity, our ordinary sense of self, and all of a sudden we're just filled with everything. And this is, I think, that kind of, undivided wholeness, for example, that's spoken about by David Bohm, who was a quantum physicist and who worked very closely with the Holiness Dalai Lama. And you just feel that, that is actually, we're interpenetrated with it. And when that state is experienced, I think, it's innately blissful. And blissful in the sense that there's a sense of completion, there's a sense of fearlessness, and there's nothing more to be grasped at, nothing desired, because there is this sense of, you kind of actualize your desires in a sense to actually experience this multidimensionality, or a multidimensional sense of the mind.
Multi-dimensional sense of the mind.
But Actualize your desires. So you're using a word that probably leads most people's mind to places that are not what you're speaking to. So if you can share a little bit, actualizing your desires from.
Okay, I'm really glad you put me out on that, because it's so tricky. You know, like, for example, even if we look at it in the context of Buddhism, and desire is essentially the root cause of so much suffering, because it's always, you know, as we know in the classical Buddhist sense, it's overcoming the word in Sanskrit is tirsta, this thirst, this craving after existence, and which keeps us in this sort of world of continual discontent and unsatisfied desire. But in the tantric sense, which I think we're speaking about here, desire becomes the path rather than something to reject. And it doesn't mean that this is just a following one's bliss in some kind of perpetual self-fulfillment or
gluttony, indulgence.
It's really about so I'm going back to your term, how do we actualize? It's about not being, I really think that there's nothing wrong with desire as long as it's balanced by what in Tibetan Buddhism is called as bodhicitta, this compassion, so that we're not fulfilling our desires just for our own sake. It's fulfilling this desire that all beings find happiness and freedom from suffering, and the causes of bliss, essentially. So when that becomes a prevailing mindset, or if desire becomes a troubled word because it's nuanced and multi sometimes can be taken out of context. It's also volition, it's will, it's this, and it's not even hope, because that also has its inherent limitations. But this whole sense of just the intent that all beings find a state of happiness and the causes of happiness, and freedom from the unnecessary forms of mentally constructed suffering that so often can be avoided if there is this state of openness, compassion, and mind's natural, I think, blissful state is allowed to supersede, almost to eclipse, the kind of egoic identifications that often keep us go back to that world, in the world of hope and fear and desire, which is actually just, then we're just grasping after straws that there's no end to it. I think that's what the Buddha was referring to. Sense.
Well, and so this is so beautiful. So within our mind, right, we have this desire to free all beings from suffering. Is that a good way to put it? And we start to experience them?
Yeah, I think so. I think it can happen differently for different people. I think it's always about in a certain sense, recognizing one's own disposition and propensities and capacities, of all of those things. Because I think, some of the things that for me kind of were so fulfilling, for other people might have been absolutely, awful and not compelling in any way at all. And I don't think that it's just about actualizing our. Well, it is about actualizing our deepest aspirations, you could say, so long as those aspirations are not entirely self-serving. But the desire, as we know, is a tricky word, and it's but it's an important word, because since we're talking here about the bliss zone, bliss is essentially what happens when desire ends, or the end of desire, because desire is always dualistic. It's always about wanting something. It's about and so in that sense, it has a, say, from a Buddhist perspective, negative connotation, because it's always about, there's a gap between the person's desires and desire. But bliss is a state where that duality is suddenly resolved. It's a state of passion, really. And bliss is there. Passion is the natural consequence of the overflow. There's nothing to hold on to. You're already in the state of abundance and energetic, and these are what the practices, yoga systems are about. It's about generating almost a cellular state of energetic abundance, which becomes bliss, which overflows into what Tibetan they call flourish, which is heartfulness. We call it compassion, but the Tibetan word in a sense, I think, express more. It's just this heartfulness. So we're sort of coming out of any kind of head orientation to just a sense of fullness in which we share that to whatever degree is possible with all beings. So
how close to bliss are you now?
Close enough. I think they're all things in moderation, including bliss. I don't think we all want it. There's no benefit to being
okay. What's Ian's most blissful moment?
Well, those I can't talk about online.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
No. Well, I think what's even more important than that.
Are you associating that with? Are you hiding that because it has to do with intimacy or shared partnership or making love?
Well,
is
I was inferring that one might think it could refer to that, which there's no reason it shouldn't. But I think even more important than that is, rather than particularly looking at life as characterized by moments of bliss and then the troughs of sort of just repose and moderate depression, or what David Thoreau referred to as quiet desperation, which we want to avoid at all costs, is just a baseline bliss, which I think we can all tap into. And that's what, whether that practice comes from just our existential engagements with humanity in a state of openness and kindness, whether it comes through intensive physical, energetic yogic practices like, Tumo, the yoga of inner fire, all of these things, which we begin to see now. We recognize their effects on the parasympathetic nervous system, on the vagus nerve system, on the microvascular system. All of this is creating a state of heightened, you could say, cellular interaction, which is blissful,
Yeah. So basically, basically we're attaining bliss through some sort of heightened physical state as well. So we're, like you said, you can get that bliss on a hike. You can get that bliss making love. You can get that bliss in a good hatha flow yoga. You can get that bliss through a really in-tuned musician playing their instruments in a particular way. They sort of that might be a little bit more associative, but there's a type of effort involved in those activities that's seeking clarity, and when the body harmonizes with the universe in an optimal way, we start to touch on those bliss elements. Would you say that that's sort of in line with what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think that was a beautiful summation of it. I think it really is about the life force, and about harmonizing the life force, heightening it, and health. And when we're in that state of natural flow with our existence, with the things we love and the beings we love and the people we love, and wanting absolute bliss and happiness for them, then in a certain sense there's this naturally achieved state that's self-reinforcing. So even then our interactions in the world, the feedback we get from the world, it just kind of magnifies a state that I think is intrinsic to our own, when we're in a state of natural balance and health, and the life force is strong.
Was there something in your life that caused you to suffer to such a degree that all of a sudden you just embarked on a path to try to find some balance and some harmony? Was it initially a runaway sort of a thing, or was it sort of like, wow, I just awoke into something, I want to figure out more of what this is, who I am in it?
Well, I think I had a period in my life of, a very, very bad climbing accident that I was ready to check out of this dimension altogether.
Oh no, that's horrible. It wasn't on one of those mountains we saw, was it?
No, I was on a mountain in Norway. That happened.
Do tell. Or I think still too scary, or is it still too scary for you to go back to?
Not at all. Anything that's scary, then we should go back to it.
Okay, let's go. Let's go back to the mountain.
Well, I'll say before that, I'd like to preface that by saying I think what it was most important is just, for me, from earliest memory, is just curiosity. I think if curiosity is strong, it's what naturally brings us outside of our own kind of personal preoccupations into just a larger engagement with life and others' lives and nature, etc., and to just pushing boundaries of one kind or another, whether they're physical, emotional, spiritual, just a certain sense of, you could call it, when I was younger, a spiritual restlessness, feeling that there's more to life than what's meeting my eyes, so wanting to push that. And rock climbing became a way of doing that, and the tantric yogas, Tibetan Buddhism, was another way of pursuing meditation. So in a certain sense, those were more important. But because I pushed boundaries to an extraordinary degree, I also had rock climbing. I was teaching rock climbing in summer in northern Norway, and went up with another instructor. It was basically midnight sun, so after the day's work was over, we went up after dinner, since the sun would never really set, to do a second descent with a very, very difficult climb, multi-pitch rock climb up Arctic Circle. Well, interesting enough, the name of the climb is called Satan.
Satan.
Oh,
Satan.
the land was.
So it's sort of an interesting climb to fall on. But anyway, that led to quite an interesting adventure, having to be, with a helicopter rescue, with having taken away in a long journey. But it was a long healing process, and I wasn't quite sure that.
So between the moment of slip and the contact of the ground, what was happening in the mind?
Well, I still actually have total amnesia of the fall itself. I remember this last moment of grasping for totally content, making this one move on the rock face. I can just still picture it so vividly in my mind. And then the next thing I know, 3 days later, I'm in an intensive care unit in a hospital on a little island off the coast of Norway with seagulls sort of slamming against the window in a storm. Wondering, how did I get here? What happened?
So
anyway,
had you died, you would have died peacefully. You wouldn't even know when it hit you, apparently, right?
Well, I suppose that might have been the case. But what was so interesting is that the recovery process was not just physical, but it involved lots of non-ordinary mental, psychic experiences. So that also, so it was for me, it was initiatic. The process that I had to go through to sort of decide that life was still worth living was also being punctuated by out-of-body experiences, by, past life memories. Many, many interesting things started to happen that just became something else to explore until my body was able to.
Would you call?
Well, the karmic reconciliation was, I think it was a little bit, like the story of Icarus, where we can scorch our wings if we fly too close to the sun. So there was this certain sense, especially at that age. I guess I was 21. I felt sort of, just graduated from college. So I was 22.
Invincible.
I felt totally invincible, and but I didn't feel kind of overly identified with that. But so I fought against that. I couldn't find out any real reason why I should have fallen. But the great thing was that even despite what all the surgeons said that I would never be able to climb again, I'd never be able to maybe even talk to the wall again. Amazing. So they were not. They're I would say they. Not very encouraging at first, but that just made me more resolved to resolve.
It seems like also you find a great joy in your writing. I mean, there's a blissful sense of immersion into your storytelling process. It seems like and I'm a screenwriter, written a few plays and dabbled in some short stories, so I know the moment I'm at my height, like all of a sudden I'm taking like 2 weeks to sit here with this piece of material, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm in it, and it feels otherworldly. Do you have that? It seems like you have that in your writing. It's such a
no, very, very much. It's like you suddenly hit that flow, and you're back in that space. That you were once in physically, and then all of a sudden it's sort of recreated and reconstellated and in a certain sense deepened. And it's funny, I always took inspiration from Henry David Thoreau, Walden, where he writes about, real journeys are always taken twice, once on the ground and the second sort of in recollection and in writing about them. So for me, the art world in particular, I was able to recreate all of those journeys and kind of relive them. But in a certain sense, it's just a creative flow where the mind itself.
Which Thoreau work pulled you in the most? Which one was it that gotcha? He wrote like five. He wrote like 5 books, right? 5?
Yeah. I guess it was Walden because I had to read that in high school, and that was very.
I think it's such a shame to waste that on high schoolers, isn't it? A waste that.
Well, it wasn't a waste on Ian because you were Batman due by 19.
But he's not me. It wasted that on me at that time. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I had a very positive high school experience. So in that way, it was a very inspiring book.
I've got a picture. I got an actual real picture of him on my wall right now, and it's an actual picture of him. And below it says, "I rejoice that owls."
Oh, that's a great line. And of course, that's a great line. And of course, is that wonderful famous quote of his: "In wildness is the preservation of the world." And I think that is just so true, because it's not just, it's often mistranslated or construed as in wilderness is the preservation of the world. But as I understand it, actually, and I forget now, but I think which text it's from, but I think it's in wildness is the preservation of the world. And so that refers to our wild minds as much as it does to the wildness of nature. Right. And we don't want this dimming and the taming down that kind of brings everything into a kind of state of
or my favorite is all good things are wild and free. I think that's Thoreau as well. All good things are
okay,
wild.
Well, there we go. Exactly.
So that probably encapsulated your youth right there. I would imagine that seems like that's you. It feels like the risks that you were taking and the quest that you were questing after something for certain. And what's cool is it's like some people make the effort to get through these initiations, to go through the gates to figure out what they really are and what's going on here. And we're living in a world now where it seems like to take those risks of initiation or to quest after one's truth is a bit of a lost art. It seems like art. It seems like it seems like we're in love with our comfort and in terms of the education of the kids coming up, and we're living in a new world with new challenges. Well, maybe not new challenges, the same old challenges. It's just whether people are encouraging people to go through their own process and to learn how to suffer in a way that's productive. Like I know when I'm writing, I suffer to a point, and then all of a sudden I'm through, and I'm in. And I understand that every time I go back to the drawing board, if I come away from it, then I'm going to have to suffer. So what happens is I know that once I'm in it, I want to stay in it as long as I can, and I'll get like 10 times more work done, because I know the moment I start celebrating and come out of it, I'm going to have to go back through that gate again and earn that space in my own mind to push forward. Because we have you and we have all of this wisdom here, we have a world that's coming up in a really interesting election. We've gone through some really challenging times as a world, I guess, with COVID. Given all of your wonderful insights, how about 3 things that we can do as a people to help deal with these distractions? Based on your
find bliss,
your infinite wisdom. Clearly, it's the answers lay in your quest, and I think more people like you need to speak up. Because it's easy to hide in the shadows and to try to slink away when somebody has all the answers. But I think these answers are pretty obvious in some respects in terms of how we can begin to respect each other more as this, basically the world's getting smaller by the second. I mean, we can like we're talking to you. Where are you?
Glasgow.
Scotland at the moment.
You're in Scotland. I mean, this is like a luxury conversation. Not only that, we're able to produce something while you're on the line. The world is small. It's shrinking because of our ability to communicate. But oddly enough, because of our ability to communicate, we're running into problems we probably never faced as a race, as a human race. So,
right.
Is there anything that you don't have to answer right off the top of your head? You can just sit there and meditate and repose, and then nail us with something quite profound.
You really set me up there, but but I think you answered the question yourself.
I did, probably.
Yeah. Well, I think in that sense, it's really. I mean, we are at this extraordinary turning point, whether we like it or not. I think in human history, nothing's ever going to be quite the same when we come out of this, and it has been apart from the health challenges that the virus has posed for all of us. It's also been an incredible collective reassessment of just what life on this planet is really all about. And in that sense, I really think that it has been, an opportunity, even with the loss of temporary, hopefully very temporary loss of freedom in terms of travel and venture and exploration, that it really is a turning back on. It's a kind of, what I like to see it as positively, is a kind of period of incubation where we kind of can turn back into, for many people, rediscovering their inner lives in a way that's often not, when we're so caught up, as it is even for me so many times, we're caught up in outer engagements of one kind or another, traveling all over the world for one reason or another. And it's easy to sort of sometimes lose sight of the incredible wealth and range of experiences that lie within ourselves. And I don't mean in a kind of just personal reminiscences and personal memories and experiences or imagination, but the kind of transpersonal depths of our own psyches.
Transpersonal depths of our own psyches.
Well, we're all interconnected, whether we like it or not.
I like that. Okay, I understand. And we're all interconnected, I guess.
Yeah, we do. If we were more in our primordial nature, we wouldn't need these devices.
That's it. And we'd find would be the bliss zone, and we'd find it in the bliss zone that there's no reason ever to sort of wish ill for anybody else. We'd make the right decisions in the elections. We know what the collective good would amount to. We wouldn't vote for personal benefit. Certainly, there wouldn't be voter suppression for personal benefit. We'd have a role model at the top of the food chain.
I'm gonna hit you. I'm gonna hit you with something now, Ian. I'm gonna hit you with.
That was really beautiful.
No, that is beautiful. No, I'm just gonna up this. I'm gonna
You're gonna up the ante. Okay.
So, Ian, if you were God, what were 3 things that you would do for our humanity? 3 things. If you could just whoosh, you could just say the word, and then we would be like. What would be the 3 things?
I would. Well, if we look at as a whole, we're all dependent upon the food we eat. So the first thing that I would decree would be no more, I would say, absolutely all agricultural chemicals, in particularly Roundup, would be completely outlawed. Yes, it would make agriculture more complicated and difficult, but the danger and the to humanity through chemical agriculture.
All right, so as God, you would remove chemical agriculture.
Well, I'm forgetting the name of what is this one particular chemical that's in Roundup. It's just awful. I mean, it's a big issue in Scotland because we're actually seeing
we don't need it actually. Everyone can go learn from the Hopis.
Okay, let's get rid of that one Roundup chemical.
So we'll get rid of that.
It's really a great request too, because it's poisoning every river we have. It's poisoning our drinking water. It's poisoning the vegetables and all the food that we eat. and now it's poisoning us. And it's very
Well,
clear
that's
that
exactly
through all the unnecessary suffering through cancers, the children are getting, and the world is getting through to this due to this Dow chemical BS. We're killing ourselves. So let's get rid of that.
Right.
So what's two?
So
What's
we'd have subsidized organic agriculture in place of the agribusiness, which is poisoning us with all kinds of pesticides, fertilizers. And,
oh, okay.
All of those. Yeah, those are all things. And my second thing, I think, again, off the top of my head, I mean, there are obviously so many ills in the world, but it's amazing that in its only 100 years of history, the impact that plastic is having on our bodies, on other species besides our own, and the destruction of the ecosystem through plastic. So I think this is an issue that
get rid of the Roundup chemical. Plastic. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there are countries like Bhutan who have basically banned, plastic now. And so you go to little shops in Bhutan and you have these wonderful sort of biodegradable little bags that everything's put into. So it's possible. But there has to be the political will to do that, which means a political system which, as far as that, I'd much prefer to have a benevolent dictator than I would to have sort of a downgraded democracy. But since benevolent dictators are hard to come by.
Well, that's a half full kind of way to look at a dictator.
No, I love it. Well, dictators have worked throughout world.
I think that's definitely the highest form of government.
Yeah,
but,
there's been good Caesars. There's been good Caesars.
We are stuck. We have that potential danger in America right now of the proverbial lowest common denominator, who are sort of manipulated from on high in order to vote according to let's say highly self-serving interests that are not in any way democratic by nature. So that's not my third thing.
Okay.
Well, I would say.
Okay,
but anyway,
let's count them down. We got to get rid of that agricultural poison that basically is held in Roundup.
Yeah, so basically a kind of highly informed, intelligent, subsidized organic agriculture. I think that would bring about positive health.
So get rid of the one and then add the other technique to it. And then remove plastics. Yeah, we get rid of plastics because it's just, again, if that doesn't stop, then we just see what's already happening to the oceans and to the planet and to the species and to our own endocrine systems as a result of microplastics. Lots of unnecessary suffering.
And I think, again, using the American example, I think there has to be extraordinary political reform so that corporations don't have the power that they have over who's in the White House, for example, or the equivalent.
What was
Did you say three?
That is three. Political reform.
Political reform. Okay, I got you. So what kind of a political system do you want to see? Which one do you think would work? Clearly, if you've been to Bhutan, that would be a good one to have, right?
Well, as I said, it's a benevolent monarchy. And that is actually an extraordinarily successful example. I mean, there's democracy, but most people in Bhutan, when they were given that option, didn't want democracy. They wanted the royal family to decrees. That's sort of where this idea of kind of the benevolent dictatorship comes in. But there's been a kind of happy medium in Bhutan, and of course there are issues with that as well. But again, I just think it's, how does that actually come about happening? I mean, we're talking sort of in a theoretical, idealistic sense.
Well, sure, theoretical, because you're not God, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, maybe you are.
But that's why.
Listen. You got three good things. So I would say you would be a wonderful God, and we will all be lucky to have you. So work on it.
Well, I don't think anybody has to be a God for this to happen. It's just about political will, and I think this is, this is a great opportunity. This is America sort of coming back into awareness and then acting on awareness and having compassion. Basically,
all right, then let's start over again. If you were God, because you don't need to be God to do those things, what would you do if you were God? All right, we got three.
I think would you end all suffering?
Like he said, basically, if Ian was a politician, this is what he would do. But now, if you're God.
Well, I think God did. I mean, there was always that wonderful line from a Woody Allen movie where he said, "It's not that I don't believe in God. I just think he was an underachiever." Um, and I always found that quite resonant because you do have to kind of wonder about, whether all this suffering was necessary as a kind of impetus to growth.
Right.
I mean, of course, it's the first noble truth, so-called, in Buddhism, which is always very troubling because it basically, as we know, well, we won't get into the whole subject of the Four Noble Truths, but I think there's a problem with
what
them.
What are the Four Noble Truths? I don't know. What are they?
Oh, okay. Well, the Four Noble Truths are generally thought of as, and this will answer the question in a larger sense, because they are the truths, and it's a mistranslation. They are the four truths for the noble ones who have renounced worldly existence. That's actually how the Four Noble Truths really translate.
Nice.
The first one of those is actually that life is suffering and characterized by strife and discontent. And so the point is that that's fine to have that as a daily kind of motivating force to drop out of society, as it were, which was originally what the early bhikshus, the monks following the Buddha, did. But when somebody who's engaged with the world takes that as a point of reference for working dynamically and compassionately in the world, it's very disempowering. So I think there's this real mix-up in Buddhism between, and this is actually, I think, what happened progressively in Buddhism with its final stage of tantric Buddhism. Basically, it recognizes, and again, it comes back to the bliss zone, that all life is in fact characterized by bliss, but we fall out of that recognition due to our getting caught up in all kinds of petty preoccupations and divisive emotions, etc. So anyway, this is the question of, can we just, if one was God, would one just take out the suffering and actually have people be more consistently aware of their true nature as bliss, as opposed to their true nature as a state of perpetual discontent? I think yes. Why not? So there is perhaps a little wiring issue there that everyone would benefit from. And of course, that's what the whole Buddhist path is supposed to be about, was just develop compassion as opposed to living in fear and aggression. So if there was a shortcut to living in wisdom and compassion as opposed to fear, ignorance, greed, and aggression, then that could only be a positive outcome, whether we're working in a theistic system or a non-theistic system.
What's theistic?
Sorry, so with a God-based belief system.
Theology, gotcha. Yeah. God-based, gotcha.
Yeah, God-based as opposed to, or without any.
So you would eliminate fear, ignorance, greed, and
aggression. I think those don't really serve anybody. No.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, listen, we got like 1 minute left. Is there something that that you haven't said that you need to say? And do you have another book coming out? And where can we look for it?
Well, we didn't talk about this one, but we'll put the link from the you and I did on your Tibetan yoga. That book is so beautiful.
Well, I will mention, I'll just talk about that book. Yeah, that one just came out last year. There are other things in the work. It's actually why I'm going down to Italy now. But just to talk about the Tibetan yoga book, I think is actually called Tibetan Yoga Principles and Practices. I do think goes well beyond its title, Tibetan Yoga. And it's basically talking about how the opportunities we have at all stages of life, whether waking, dreaming, sleeping, dying, relationships, solitude, all of these things, and different ways we can awaken to a more kind of comprehensive, a more kind of enlightened approach to all of those aspects of our life, and which becomes a grand adventure which we can undertake even in isolation and lockdown.
That's what this book's about. Right?
So it was written before all that, but I do think, when I look at it in retrospect, it's not a bad book to have if you're forced into isolation, because in a certain sense it's reflecting on these seminal core practices of Tantric Buddhism that can be undertaken in any circumstance. So in that sense, it was a guide to opportunities that life offers us at every stage of existence, including dying.
Well, this is the one you want to have. This is the isolation book. This is the
cave book.
This is the COVID.
That's your book. Yeah. That's self-isolation manual 1. So we're working on the second.
Are you working on number 2?
Self-Isolation Manual 1. Wow, what a
Yeah.
beautiful gift that you've given us to. No doubt, there's so much in it that we've only scratched the surface with you, and I only regret that I didn't push you harder to get in deeper. But next time, if there is a next time, if you want to come back with us, next time you have a book or anything you want to talk about, or a revelation, or when you see mystical, magical stuff, you gotta call us up and come on the air and share with us again, because we've loved having you so much.
Well, I'd love to, and I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. I think creating a bliss zone in a world in which fear is starting to gnaw at our very core and sense of who and what we are, it's something wonderful. So the bliss zone becomes this ever-expanding circle.
Maybe that's what you're right. That's your name. That's the name of your next book. The Joy Zone, or the Bliss Zone.
The Bliss Zone.
I thought that's the name of your show.
It's Joy Zone is Joy Zone. My book's Very Naked Bliss. I need to get back into more bliss.
Joy, they're pretty interchangeable in that sense. So it's fantastic, and I'm really grateful for your inviting me to participate in your.
We love having you. We love having you. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say goodbye to you, and then we're gonna talk back to you. And then we're going to close out, so you can continue to watch. It's live streaming if you want to watch the end of the show. There you go. You got it.
Ian, thank you so much for being here. And wow, have so much fun in Italy. I think that's an amazing place to be right now.
Well, listen, we're going to send you out, and just click off. And gosh, we'll miss you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very good. I'll leave the room. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ian. Safe travel.
Bye.
Hey, what a mensch.
Yeah.
What a mensch.
He's a wealth of wisdom and adventures. We didn't even get into all his adventures.
I tried to push him into a couple of adventures. I think falling off a cliff and almost dying is an adventure.
Of course, that's I think an early on adventure, but he's had a lot more. People, if they really are interested in diving into like the aspect of adventure, the Heart of the World is a good way to get a taste.
You show that camera if you want people
so
to see that.
here at Heart of the World.
And I put that up on the.
And the second edition just came out. He said it's a new introduction, but it really gives you a taste for adventure. Plus, it also teaches people a little bit about respect of the earth realm, crossing over into those unseen veiled realms, as Ian mentioned, that you get to access when you go to certain parts of the planet, and it's pretty magical. So that's a great way to get a taste of his work. He's done a lot of adventure treks down in Bhutan. Hopefully after the COVID, he'll get back up with the lamas and monks there.
So it's at Ian Baker.
Yeah, and I put the links below here on our page at Ian Baker. Journeys, it still has some information up, and his Ian Baker website is under construction.
Right.
But he's easy to Google, and I put the links of his books here too.
Oh, good. Yeah, so many beautiful books. I mean,
he writes for the Dalai Lama, which we didn't get into.
How did you not bring that up?
The Tibet, it's just way too much. The Tibetan Art of Healing. I mean, for anyone.
You go right to the.
Yeah, so there.
Can't say
and then
it's reflecting. Yeah.
You hold it up, and then also.
I got this one.
So that's the Tibetan Art of Healing, and then we have Dalai Lama's Secret Temple, which you get to see a lot of beautiful tankas and drawings that are in that temple. And then we had, Romeo, we had on here, he did the text for Celestial Gallery, which is behind you. So he's a masterful writer and the scribe to translate all of potentially this lost wisdom. He has recorded it. So what a treat to have him here today.
It's nice having him on. So who do we have on next?
We have Shyla Ray.
Is Shyla Ray coming on in just a few minutes?
No, we're going to be signing off. We'll be re-signing on at 2:15 with Shyla Ray here on Indie Creators in the Joy Zone. And you can hear all our broadcasts here on this page, or you can go to iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, Amazon Music.
Put in ICJZ TV or Indie Creators in the Joy Zone.
Either way, or our names. You can find us a million sideways on the internet, and we've tried to make our work accessible on many platforms as possible because everyone has their preference.
Okay. Well, we're gonna send you out with the little promo that we came in with, and then we'll see you guys at 2:15.
All right.
With us. So let's watch that little trailer there.
I seek truth, no use sits within me. How deep would I go to find what I know about me? You don't know me like God does, like I do. I to myself to know how to sing, trust myself, believe in everything, and I know I can keep up with my mind because I have a practice that's aligned with my belief system, my system. I can tell truth from my life.